Say hello to Solfachord. Now, Solfachord is Konami's most recent Pendulum archetype, and unfortunately, pretty much for its entire lifespan since release last year, it's been terrible. The deck just doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything old Pendulum decks didn't, and it doesn't do what they already did better. However, in the most recent set of releases, they've gotten a couple new cards, most notably a brand new Link 3, Grand Solfachord Cards, and a new quick play spell, Solfachord Symphonia, that do give the deck quite a big boost and actually allow it to make decent going first boards, and a little bit more flexibility too. Now, as for the specifics of the new cards, starting off with the most notable one, the Link 3, Grand Solfachord Cards. Now this is a Link 3 light fairy type monster with 2700 attack, who can be summoned with 2 monsters including a pendulum monster, and it gains 100 attack for each face-up pendulum monster in your extra deck, and this is any pendulum monster, not even just Solfachords. And activated effects of pendulum monsters this card points to cannot be negated, basically making them all above spell speed. Then, once per turn, when your opponent activates a card or effect, quick effect, you can special summon one Solfachord card with an odd pendulum scale from your pendulum zone to your zone this card points to, and if you do negate the activation, then you can add one Solfachord pendulum monster with an even pendulum scale from your deck to your extra deck face up. And while this is a pretty good representation, if you don't understand the deck already, of its whole gimmick, which is basing different effects off of having odd and even pendulum scales and manipulating the monsters in your pendulum scales. And while this is a very strong Link monster, it gives negation, it gets very high attack stats, it means your pendulums are impossible to negate, and it lets you even do some extra setup on top of the negation by putting pendulums from your deck to your extra deck for a follow-up turn, especially in pair with something like the field spell to just add it to your hand, basically letting this card allow you to, in a roundabout way, search a monster while also negating any card your opponent controls, and summoning another card to a zone it points to. Then, for the brand new spell, we have Solfachord Symphonia, which is a quick play spell, which has 3 effects, and you can apply these effects in sequence based on the number of face-up Solfachord pendulum monsters with different names in your extra deck. If you have 3 or more, all Solfachord pendulum monsters you currently control gain attack equal to their own pendulum scale times 300 until the end of the turn. If you have 5 or more, you can destroy 1 card your opponent controls. Then, if you have a card with an odd pendulum scale in your pendulum zone, you draw 1 card, and if you have 7 or more, you can special summon 1 Grand Solfachord monster from your extra deck. And, well, this card, if you have full setup, is incredibly strong. It buffs the attack of all your Solfachords, it destroys an opponent's card, draws you a card, and then summons a Solfachord from your extra deck. But it does require a good bit of setup. It's not always going to be online, and really the most impressive effect in the context of this archetype is the 5 or more effect of destroying a card, non-targeting, and drawing 1, as there's not really anything great to summon from the extra deck, because you'll often want a Grand Solfachord Cards on your field already, and Musica is decent, but really the card is good. It's a 1-of, it's easily searchable, so it's worth running. Now, as for the original set of Solfachords, starting off with their effective boss monster, Solfachord Cards. And this card has the pendulum effect that your opponent cannot activate a spell, trap card, or a monster effect when your Solfachord pendulum monster is pendulum summoned. And this is an effect that basically all of them share, although the higher scale ones instead have the effect where pendulum summons cannot be negated, and the lower scales prevent you from responding with card effects. But they effectively do more or less the same thing. They just make it where when they're in the scales, your opponent cannot, say, Torrential Tribute or Solemn Judgment your pendulum summon, which is nice because those are cards that can ruin pendulum decks. But where these cards really differ is in their monster effects. Now, Cards can be special summoned from your hand by tributing 2 pendulum monsters. And this is a neat summoning condition, but because this card doesn't prevent itself from being summoned in other ways, you can usually more easily get it out with another method. Now as for its actual effects, both are hard once per turn. For starters, you can, on your turn, target one face-up card your opponent controls, or up to 2 if you have an odd pendulum scale, negate their effects until the end of your opponent's turn. Then, when an effect of a monster on the field is activated with an equal or lower attack than the highest pendulum scale in your pendulum zone times 300, quick effect, you can destroy that monster. So for example, if your opponent activates the effect of a monster of 2000 attack, and you have something like Acudia in your pendulum scale, which has a pendulum scale of 8, that is 2400 times 300, so then you can destroy that monster. It's not exactly an easy to understand quickly effect, it's very odd, but it's interruption, and it's interruption in a deck that desperately needs it. And while I'm running 3 Kulia because it's one of the main boss monsters of the deck, and it's their scale 1, it's very easy to summon, and going second is actually quite nice because being able to negate basically 2 card effects is very good, especially if you can then destroy them if they try and chain. Then I'm running 2 Angelia, and Angelia is their level 6. You'll notice I'm not running level 7, I think it's bad. You can choose to run it if you want, but it just doesn't feel like it really gels with the archetype. Now Angelia is very good, it's a scale 3, which is still a decent scale for the deck, and its effect is while you have an odd pendulum scale in your pendulum zone, if your Solfachord pendulum monster attacks, your opponent cannot activate spell trap cards or effects until the end of the damage step. So it stops battle phase effects. It's not that big of a deal, but it's nice. But its main effect is that during your main phase, you can tribute 1 Solfachord pendulum monster, even if face down, and if you do, special summon 1 Solfachord pendulum monster from your deck, whose scale is 2 higher or 2 lower than that monster. This is a very good effect. This can just instantly get you to Kulia, or it can say let you summon Fancia off of Angelia, and if you tribute another one, you can tribute Cudia to Gondelita or vice versa. It's a nice effect. I'm running 2 of this card because it's very accessible. There's plenty of ways to search it, so I don't really feel the need. I could understand running more copies of it, maybe say 3 Angelia and 2 Kulia, but I feel like having constant access to Kulia is just a little too strong. Then for the next one, the level 5 Gracia. Now Gracie's effect is that while you have an even pendulum scale in your pendulum zone, if your Solfachord pendulum attacks, your opponent cannot activate monster effects. So basically, if you have these 2 set up, you have an Armades for all your Solfachords, which is nice. Then this card's major effect is that if it is normal or special summoned, you can search any Solfachord spell and trap card. And the Solfachord spell traps are very good, especially something like their normal spell or field spell. So being able to search them at any time is very nice, and once again, Gracia is very easy to get access to, because, well, basically all the Solfachords are very easily searchable. Then, I'm running 1 Fancia, which is the level 4, and while you have an odd pendulum scale in your pendulum zone, if your Solfachord pendulum monster be destroyed by battle, you can destroy this card instead. It's not a good effect, but it can maybe come up. And the major effect is that during your main phase, you can add 1 Solfachord pendulum from your deck to your extra deck face up, which is a nice setup effect. And the reason why I'm running 1 of this is you're not always going to need that. You can just summon it off Angelia if you really want it. It's pretty easily accessible. Its levels are also nice for synchro summoning, which I will later elaborate more on with the little Pendulum Magician package I have. Then the next one I am running is the level 3, which is Elidia. And Elidia, while you have an even pendulum scale in your pendulum zone, you take no damage from battles involving your Solfachord pendulum monsters. Bad effect again, but you take what you get with this deck. And then if this card is normal special summoned, you can target 1 spell trap card your opponent controls, return to the hand. It can remove floodgates that are annoying or just spell traps in general. It's a decent effect. It's run 1 because it's not hard to get to and it's kind of niche. This is by far the most cuttable of all of them. I would honestly maybe even be tempted to cut 1 for an Angelia or another copy of Fancia, but I'm running it here just as an option. Its scale is nice. Then the level 2, Solfachord Dreamia. And this is a very good one, as its main effect is that if you control a Solfachord card in your pendulum zone, you can just special summon it from your hand. So basically it just gives you an extra body on field. And its odd even effect is that If you have an odd pendulum scale in your pendulum zone, if a Solfachord pendulum monster you control be destroyed by a card effect, you can destroy this card instead of one of those cards. It's a Solfachord effect, it's not good. And then Cutia, this is the real powerhouse of the deck, as it has the effect, or when it's normal or special summoned, you can add one Solfachord pendulum monster from your deck to your hand, except for Cutia, which is very good. It just searches a monster. And its other monster effect is that while you have an even scale, Solfachord pendulum monsters you control gain 100 attack equal to their own pendulum scale. Which is neat, it makes Cutia have 900 attack. Now as for their spell trap cards, to start off with, Solfachord Elegance, which is one of the craziest support cards ever. It has 3 effects, the first of which is you can place one Solfachord pendulum from your deck to your pendulum zone. Then the second effect is that you can add one Solfachord pendulum monster from your hand to the extra deck face up, then place 2 Solfachord pendulums with an odd and even scale from your deck into the pendulum zone. And then the third effect is that you can add 2 cards, one odd and even pendulum scale from your pendulum zone to the extra deck face up, and if you do, draw 2 cards. And you can only activate one of these per turn. And you can probably tell that this is an insane card. It lets you do whatever setup you want, and if you have the full setup, you can instead use it to extend to draw more cards. It's an incredible card. It's very searchable. It's good. Running at 3. It doesn't matter what you're doing with this deck, this card is always good. Then I'm running 2 of their field spell, Solfachord Harmonia. This card has, once again, 3 effects that you can only activate one of them per turn. Its first effect is that you can add one face-up Solfachord pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand, which is a very good effect. There's plenty of ways to get a Solfachord into the extra deck, and this lets you just add it straight back. And especially useful something like Elegance to, lose less cards if you use one of its third or second effects. Then its second effect is you can increase the pendulum scale of one Solfachord card in your pendulum zone by its level this turn, which is a neat effect if you have a really bricked hand and you don't have the correct scales. This can maybe help you fudge it to fix them. And then if you control a Solfachord pendulum monster cards with at least 3 different even scales or 3 different odd scales, destroy one card your opponent controls. If you can somehow get the conditions for this card, it's a neat removal. Beyond me why it's that difficult to trigger, but it's there. The main effect is the first effect, and I'm running one of it, or 2, because the first effect is the main one. It's very easily searchable, and you only ever need to control one because it's a field spell. Then, for the other spells, I'm running Solfachord Symphonia, the other new card, which I already talked about before. I'm running one of it because it's searchable, and it also has some specific, trigger effects. Then I am running Solfachord Musica, and this is a pretty good trap card, as you can activate one of these effects based on the pendulum scales of Solfachords you control. If you control a Solfachord pendulum with an odd scale, you can special summon one face-up Solfachord pendulum with an odd pendulum scale from your extra deck. Even, you can special summon one face-up Solfachord pendulum monster with an even pendulum scale, and even and odd, you can target one card your opponent controls, destroy it. So this card can be removable if you have an odd and even Solfachord, which isn't too hard to do. If you only have an odd, you can then summon another odd from your extra deck. If an even, it's a card that lets you kind of get more bodies on the board outside of just your pendulum summon. It's kind of slow, but once again, easily searchable. There's ways to discard it if it's completely dead. A super cuttable card, but this deck is desperate for good archetypal cards, and I was just testing it mostly. I'm also running a small Pendulum Magician package, consisting of 1 Performapal Celestial Magician, 2 White Wing Magician, and 2 Harmonizing Magician, alongside 3 Duelist Alliance, and 2 Pendulum Call to search them. And the main reason why I'm running these is just to give a little more extension, a little more power. Performapal Celestial Magician lets you search pendulums in the end phase over the course of a duel, which is nice in grind games. White Wing Magician is a tuner. That's it. And then Harmonizing Magician is the card that when it's pendulum summoned, can summon one of these 2. And you may be asking, why am I running this one, White Wing, as a tuner if I have Harmonizing, which is also a tuner? And well, the reason why is because Harmonizing Magician can only be used for a synchro summon if all materials are Magician Pendulum monsters. And so sometimes you want to make a Borrowed Savage with something like, I don't know, a Fancia, you know, a non-magician. So having White Wing accessible like that, which doesn't care what it's used for, is nice. And just in general, there's not many better targets. It's a nice combo. It lets you make Borrowed Savage, which is not negate something the deck desperately needs. It puts more bodies on the field so you can make better link boards, which is decent. You know, Duelist Alliance and Pendulum Call are pretty nice as well for getting those cards in hand. Pendulum Call, you know, adds 2 from your deck to your hand and makes Magicians in your bum zones immune destruction, which is neat. It's just a solid card. As well, I'm also running 3 triple attack, as I like running this in decks like this, as it's a good staple card, but it also doesn't feel like it conflicts too much because it lets you draw cards. You can't really run that many hand traps or staple cards in Pendulum decks. Even running this 3, you might brick on triple attack, but the deck really needs a way to do something going second and play through hand traps. Additionally, I am also running 3 Diviner of the Herald, and this is an excellent card in this deck, as with it, you're mostly going to send Trias Hierarchy to the graveyard, use Trias to tribute Diviner, summon itself, trigger Diviner's floating effect to summon Cutia straight from the deck, which is very good. Not only does this let you then search the Solfachord, it's also a 1-card way to summon Beyond the Pendulum, which is one of the other amazing cards Pendulums get access to, and so opening Diviner means you probably are going to make at least some kind of decent end board. Now, as for the Link monsters, I'm running one of Misiccia, and this is the Solfachord Link 2. This requires 2 Pendulum monsters, and has a couple effects. During your main phase, you can add 1 Pendulum monster from your hand to the extra deck face up, and 1 face up Pendulum monster from your extra deck to the hand, as long as one of them has an even scale and the other has an odd scale. This lets you swap pendulums. It's a neat effect that can come up, but not much. The other effect is that when you pendulum summon a Solfachord monsters, you can target one of them, add a Solfachord pendulum monster from your deck to your hand, whose level equals the scale of that monster. So this is a fine card. You know, it's largely been completely outclassed by Beyond the Pendulum, so you'll rarely summon it, but you might have cases where you want to. You can summon it off of Symphonia. This deck has plenty of extra deck space, it's fine. I'm running IP, and there's a lot of things you can do with this deck. It's very good at making links, and so you can make IP and then go into, say, a Unicorn, or an Avermax, or an Underworld Goddess, because sometimes you might have a bunch of bodies left in the field. Beyond the Pendulum is one of the craziest cards ever printed. It requires 2 effect monsters, including a Pendulum, and when it is link summoned in the extra monster zone, you can pay 1200 life points and add 1 Pendulum monster from your deck to your hand, but for the rest of this turn, unless you Pendulum summon after this effect resolves, you can not activate monster effects, and the effects of any cards in your Pendulum zones are negated. But it lets you search any Pendulum card, and as I said before, Diviner lets you very easily have 1 card access to this, and cards like Dreamia mean that something like a Cutia can also basically be a 1-card Beyond the Pendulum. And so it's just a very strong card, absolutely worth running, and its other effect is that if 2 monsters of different original levels are Pendulum summoned at the same time to the zones this card points to, you can target 2 cards in the field to destroy them. Very easy to pull off in a deck whose whole gimmick is it runs tons of different levels. Pretty good for going second on the grind game. Absolutely run at least 2 of this card. You want more, say if one gets hand trapped for the next turn, or over the course of a duel, it's too strong not to run. Then I'm running Sprite Elf. This is probably the least essential inclusion in here. It's a Link 2. You know, you probably recognize it. Needs 2 monsters, including a level 2. The main idea behind this card is you can summon it with something like a Diviner or a Dreamia, and then revive something like a Diviner from the grave to go into a Unicorn to extend. It's there. Realistically, you could replace it with, say, any given good level 8 synchro. You know, maybe Starlight or whatever you think is good. This is the flex spot. And so I'm just putting it here because this extra last spot is completely open. then I'm running Dark because it's not impossible to summon, because you do have Darks, you have Harmonizing, you have Celestial. It's excellent in this format. It's probably not going to stop being good anytime soon. It's a good link too. Then I'm running Nightmare Phoenix, just a solid link monster. You can summon it off IP, it's good. Selene lets you revive spellcasters from the grave, and you have ways to get them. Mainly Pendulum Call lets you discard spellcasters in the grave, which you can then summon. This deck runs plenty of spells. It's a nice way to get to access code. Unicorn is Unicorn. It removes cards. I already went over why Kulia is good. Appaloosa is just a nice way to negate and not too hard to summon in this deck. Access code lets you OTK. Avermax alongside IP is pretty nice. Closed World, Pendulum decks always have an easy way to get a bunch of fodder on field, so this is a nice card. And Burled Savage is not hard to summon and gives you firepower in a deck that really doesn't have it very much otherwise. Now as for a showcase of what the deck can actually do. And well, this is a pretty good hand, and you'll notice that Beauty is in his hand. This was an earlier list, I cut this card out later. You'll see this could literally be any Solfachord. You can run Beauty if you want. I just think its effect is bad. It lets you target a monster your opponent controls, or if you have an extra scale, you can target a monster, and when they leave the field, they get banished, which I guess is neat. It's not the worst, I guess, against like tier. It's just very low impact, and its other effect is that at the start of damage step, if this card battles a monster with an equal or higher attack than the lowest pendulum scale times 300, destroy it. So it kind of has a Catastor sort of effect. It's not bad, I just didn't consider it worth running. It's kind of annoying to summon compared to some of the other ones. It's fine, it's probably better than the level 3. But regardless, the other cards in the hand is Pendulum Call, Solfachord Harmonia, Diviner of the Herald, and Solfachord Excellence. And this is a very good hand, you'll see. Now, well, to start off with, I summon Diviner of the Herald, I dump Trias, Tribute Diviner, then trigger Diviner to summon Cudia. And well, then I can go ahead and trigger Cudia to search a Solfachord, in this case Kulia, and I summon Beyond the Pendulum. Using Beyond the Pendulum, I search for my deck Harmonizing Magician. Then after this, I can activate Harmonia to go ahead and add Kulia for my extra deck back to my hand. Then I can use Pendulum Call, discarding Elegance, as I considered this to be kind of the least important card to what I was aiming to do. Maybe it wasn't correct, but it probably wouldn't have impacted the end board much. And then with that, Pendulum Call, I search White Wing and Celestial Magician. Then I scale up Kulia and Cudia, and Pendulum summon 4 from my hand. Then I trigger Harmonizing Magician to summon from my deck White Wing Magician. Next, I go ahead and make a Kulia. Then I use Celestial's effect and sync these off for a Burled Savage. And then I use the last 2 for an IP Masquerena. I go into the end phase, and I search a Cudia. And this is a deceptively pretty competent board. Burled Savage is there as an Omnigate, and IP can go into something like a Unicorn or whatever, something you want to summon. But Kulia has some very interesting interactions right here with this end board exactly, because when you trigger his negation effects, you could do summon an Odd Scale Pendulum, which then you can summon Kulia from your Pendulum zone. And when you do that, then you have Kulia on the field who can use her interruption effect, which is still a very solid one, and with Cudia, basically any monster of 2400 or less attack can be destroyed by Kulia. Then after you use Kulia's effect, you can even link it off of IP for a Unicorn, discarding a Cudia in your hand, and on the next turn, you'll draw a card, and have the Harmonia effect to add a Solfachord from your extra deck to your hand. It's a pretty good end board, all things considered. It can stop a lot of decks, so, I'm sure there's ways to navigate to a better end board than this if you've really mastered the deck, but like with all Pendulum decks, it's not easy to play. It's very non-linear, especially this deck, which has almost no research done on how to play it because it's not good. But it is nice that with just this new Link 3, this end board goes from 2 interruptions to 4 with much better follow-up because of Kulia. You can add, say another Cudia to your extra deck to add with Harmonia. It's a solid end board, and you'll probably win the duel if you manage to make this. And that's all really. Feel free to subscribe if you liked the content and want to see more later on, and please do leave your feedback in the comments.